commanded by a guy named Rodney Mason. Now, we already learned that a big portion of this unit was sick. They were a huge unit to begin with. They had more men in this brigade than the other two regiments, for sure. And now, with those other 4 companies that have been moved down the road for the 54th, they're obviously the biggest. This is the biggest chunk of manpower that Colonel Stuart has in his brigade. Most muskets. 71st was, like I said, in command of Rodney Mason, but he didn't organize and recruit the unit. This guy did. This big old, I love it when reenactors say, hey, there were no fat Civil War soldiers. Well, we've always,
a lot of them.
People are, and you're going to lose weight as the war goes on, and you walk farther and farther and farther and eat worse and worse. But anyway, but I just think it's funny when you find these guys that are very well fed. This guy raised the regiment. His name is Barton Kyle, and he's their colonel back in Ohio when this unit's mustered into service. Rodney Mason, his dad is the Adjutant General of Ohio. And they give command, the colonelship, to Rodney, and Kyle is now Lieutenant Colonel, second in command at Shiloh. The men love Barton Kyle. They were recruited by him, and they probably joined up because of him. They don't know Mason. And they don't know Mason at all. Mason has had a little bit of experience. He was at 1st Manassas in charge of the 2nd Ohio Infantry. After the rout, for some reason, he is no longer in charge of the 2nd, and now here he is in the Western Theater in charge of the 71st because of Daddy. Initially, they start on the fence line too, to the right of the 55th and 54th. They fall when the 55th and 54th start moving back, and they start receiving artillery fire directly from Girardi's battery, 6 guns. They fall back to their 2nd position where the monument stands. After the camps are taken by the Union forces, Mason and the 77th lose contact with Stuart. And it's about noon, like I said, and Stuart says, I don't see him anymore. I don't see him ever again. And now, and there's no more markers to him on the battlefield. All right? After the battle's over, all those things that I've told you come to light. A lot of men are saying, including officers, we saw them leaving the front, retreating to the rear. All right, those 300 men. Stuart's report is now well known. And Stuart says, I never saw him again for the rest of the day. And there's another issue. The 53rd Ohio. Do you know the story about the 53rd Ohio here at Shiloh? They were part of Sherman's division over by the church.
Oh, that's Apple.
Apple. He got nervous, the colonel. He wasn't a professional soldier. He started freaking out. He told everybody to save themselves, and he ran. And back then, if your leader leaves, the men usually do too. And the 53rd fell apart, except for a couple of companies, and they split. So everybody knows the 53rd fled from the field. Ohio. You all know about the 13th Ohio Artillery, Myers Battery. Brand new unit, put into the field over in the Peach Orchard, part of Stephen Hurlbut's division. The first shot from enemy artillery hits an ammunition chest. Explodes, the men run. Myers and everybody take off, leaving the horses at the front. Infantry has to go rescue get the horses. That's vital military property. Placing good artillery, well, that's tough. So they have to send infantry out there. And Myers Battery will be completely disbanded. Myers is kicked out of the Army, and all the men are dispersed to other units, so they can never work together again. 13th Ohio, 53rd Ohio. Do we see a pattern? Now, this starts being an issue. The 71st Ohio. And now people are saying, well, I saw Rodney Mason. Now, Rodney Mason apparently was a big dude. We cannot find any photos or images, sketches of this guy. We have tried, scoured Ohio archives, writing to people in Ohio, but we haven't found anything yet, an image of this guy. But he was apparently bigger than Kyle. And now there's reports. They saw him on horseback at full gallop, going away from the fight. Not only that, poor old Kyle, as they're fighting in this position here that they hold for about, I won't say, about 15 or 20 minutes, this big dude, he doesn't have a horse anymore. Something happened. I'm not sure if it was wounded, killed, or somehow but he's on foot, and he's a big guy, and he's moving around a lot. They get tired. He sat down on a stump, took a bullet in the brain. So Kyle is not there to tell the story about what happened in 71st. His unit. And the men don't have really any relationship with Rodney Mason. So you don't see a lot of people saying anything from the lower ranks. All right. So that's the 71st. And now in the newspapers up in Ohio, especially, Rodney Mason has a new name. Runaway Mason. So things are getting worse for 71st. 71st is sent up to Fort Donelson as part of garrison duty, still under Mason. 4 companies under Mason are now sent to Clarksville to man the base there to protect it from guerrillas or any Confederate incursion. Well, Confederate cavalry come up and surround the town and order Mason to surrender, which he does without a shot. Oh, 71st! What are you doing? September of 1862, Mason is cashiered, drummed out of the Army. 71st, for the most part, as far as officer corps goes, they're dispersed. Just like what they do with the 13th Ohio. They dispersed them to other units so they can't work together. You can't really fire them, they didn't do anything wrong. And the men, the 71st, will stay together under new leadership and serve all the way through the Atlanta campaign and so forth. There is a book called Redemption of the 71st. It came out a couple of years ago, which talks about them going out and doing good, finally. But 1862 was not good for them. But what happened here? Look at where we left Stuart. Prentiss on our right is gone. Sherman is gosh, 3/4 of a mile away from where we're standing. There are 5,000 troops across coming in here. There's a huge hole. They don't even have to really deal with Stuart if they can get past his marksmen shooting at him. They can bypass him. But Chalmers and Jackson both right, they came into a heavy fire. From who? 71st apparently ran away. In 1863, well, late 1862, beginning of 63, Senator Wade out of Ohio says he wanted another good friend of the Masons. He wanted the War Department to open up an investigation and get Mason back in the Army. The Secretary of War stated blankly that as long as the war is going on, we will never investigate this. He's out. So Mason is gone. So what is done is the state and other bigwigs from the area, they go out and start collecting affidavits from all these soldiers that have been dispersed, that were under Mason. They really don't know Mason, maybe don't even like him. They just, why would they defend him? Sort of, he's not Kyle. If it was Kyle, they would be all over it. They love him, but why? So they go out and start collecting these affidavits in January, February of 1863. behind us we have a ravine, just like they have, not as deep, and I'm not going in it today, I'm being wimpy, I'm sorry. Unless you just have to go. Oh, good, I don't see anybody. Good.
Leave that forget.
It's not as deep. Exactly, did you already do it?
No.
We've, not as deep as you get closer to the river, like behind the 54th. That thing's massive. But there's another ravine, that ravine continues, and these things don't just stop. Continues, and you get to a rise. About 150, 200 yards behind us. Captain H.K. McConnell, Company B, 71st Ohio, January 1863. I think it's January 5th. They ask him, were you here? What was your position? That kind of thing. It's an affidavit. He's being deposed, giving his deposition in legalese. At about 11 a.m., we exchanged fire, several rounds, when our regiment gave back and was prevented by falling into confusion by Colonel Mason, who led it back and reformed it 150 to 200 yards to the rear. There is a rise about 200 yards from where we're standing, on the other side of that ravine. Lieutenant Joshua Babb, Company C, 71st Ohio. I saw him, Mason, repeatedly during the day and did not observe any unusual excitement. In Babb's deposition, he says Mason was there the entire time. Again, these guys have no relationship with Mason. And now they haven't seen him for, gosh, at least since September. But probably even before that when they surrendered Clarksville. And he says they were with him. And here's Captain Solomon Huck of the 71st. About 8:15, Colonel Mason ordered the sick and wounded to the rear. Here's your 300 guys going to the rear. And then Colonel Huck, who was where we are and then fell back the 200 yards, Colonel Huck sketched a map and showed the Army where they were. 71st Ohio, back on the ridgeline. The rebels dealing with the 54th and 55th. This would be Chalmers turning to deal with their sharpshooters. I call them, they're not really sharpshooters, but that's how they're firing. And the 71st Ohio, when they saw that, at about 1 o'clock, fired into that flank. And Chalmers talks about that. If these guys were not here, or 200 yards from where we're standing, Chalmers could have walked to Pittsburgh Landing, especially before 2 o'clock, and MacArthur and those other units got behind where we are to start closing this, to keep the flank from being overrun. Now, it doesn't help Mason. He doesn't get back in the Army. The 71st will, like I say, redeem itself. I didn't make copies for everybody. I think it's one copy now. I apologize. If you want one, and even in this one by Huck, this is the guy who drew the map, Captain Solomon Huck. The men gave way, seeking cover in the woods behind us. They were quickly rallied by Colonel Mason and his officers, and led them back 250 to 300 yards across a ravine to the crest of a steep hill on the other side of it, which had previously been selected by Colonel Mason as a strong position, but he had been ordered forward by Colonel Stuart. There they had to be here. No matter if there's not a marker there, the guys knew they were here. Again, this was made later, and these guys, there's no reason for them to support. They're not even in the 71st anymore for the most part, these officers. And they're still in the Army, so they're not trying to save their own
Would they not have
career.
been further up than this marker, though?
This is their second position. This is what he's talking about right here.
Falling back?
Yeah, this is I will say their second position. But this is their first falling back position.
But first, when they fired into the flank, they were on top of that ridge.
They're in there's that fence line that they're using. So yeah, they most definitely, unless there's some, and there's no other regiment that we have found a report or a site that could have been here. Everybody else is accounted for. So if you've got a large enough mass of troops to keep back an entire brigade, and 600 rifles is a pretty deadly, especially if they're concealed or have the high ground. You know, there had to have been something here. The one thing I always wanted was one day we can go to that hill and do an archaeological study and see if we can find dropped bullets, because we know the muskets they had. And if we can, because those guys dropped bullets are very common during, especially early in the war, because these guys are fumbling around and scared to death, ill-trained troops, and then we can prove that they were on that hill. But until that happens, we can't really prove it. So that's what happens. Now, they do turn this flank. By 2:30, poor old Stuart is out of ammo. They have utilized every bullet from all the cartridge boxes that they had. And they start falling back. They actually come this way. Mason talks about seeing them falling back, and he doesn't fall back till they start moving. Because now he realizes, oh, we are by ourselves. And there are units now by 2:30. By 2 o'clock, MacArthur's gotten behind us several hundred yards on another ridge with the 9th and 12th Illinois, and the 50th Illinois under Colonel Bain will also support them, and then later by about 2:30 the 16th Wisconsin from Prentice will be shifted over there, so that's a pretty strong defensive position. But now Stuart is falling back. Mason writes in his report that he saw that, and he starts falling back. Now though, Chalmers and Jackson know everybody's falling back, and they are right on their tail. The 9th Illinois, behind us a few hundred yards, will suffer the most casualties percent of unit on the field for the Union Army. And even the 50th Illinois gets torn up who are trying to support him. What happened was, as Stuart moves back, they're moving back at a good clip. They're not just falling back. There's no reason to make a stand. They have no more ammunition. They are hightailing it to safety. They are saving their units now. And now Colonel Stewart's been wounded. So even he's falling back. He's probably in front of them, being taken to the hospital. And Jackson and Chalmers are catching up to them as they fumble through these ravines. Now, Chalmers and Jackson are part of Withers' division, Bragg's Corps. Bragg's Corps, for the most part, are carrying First National Confederate flags. The circle of stars, red, white, and red bars. The actual stars and bars, for all us historians, we know what that is. The First National Confederate flag is what's being used by most of their regiments. There's no wind. The 50th and the 9th Illinois see all these blue coats coming at them of Stuart's brigade with the Union flags flying on the run. They're allowing them to come through. Well, guess who, right on their tail, boom, guess who comes through? Chalmers and Jackson. And they're getting in the rear, and they didn't know. It was just so much mayhem, so much of a mass of humanity, and the flags all look the same. And the 9th Illinois, if you don't know this, up until this morning, they were wearing gray. The 9th Illinois were wearing gray prison uniforms, because the state of Illinois didn't have enough uniforms to go around this early. They are wearing gray uniforms with stiff little gray caps, they called them, until this morning. They moved out this morning, the 9th Illinois, with the 12th Illinois under MacArthur. And MacArthur's worried about it too. When the baggage train arrives with the new uniform, MacArthur halts his brigade. The 9th Illinois strips naked on the battlefield and puts on their brand new uniforms, the blue uniform. Probably Illinois state jackets, a real cool looking one still, with all the buttons and the epaulets. short jacket. And now they're headed towards the front, and they get in this melee. If there's gray uniforms are coming at them too, that's not unusual to them, is it? No, they see a mass of humanity. It doesn't matter the color uniform, and all the flags look the same. And they pay the price. They suffer for it. If y'all come hear me later for the Grant's Last Line, I'll let you know what happened to the 50th Illinois, because they get back there at the last line and they are nothing but a shell of their original self by the time they get back there. But they're going to play a part in that position. Well, do y'all have any questions?
Chris,
yes.
The MacArthur you're referring to, is that the same one as at Franklin, who was Douglas's
No,
father?
no. This is
Different guy?
John MacArthur, spelled a little bit differently, not part of the same family at all. Nope.
Who was in charge after Stuart got wounded?
Gosh, I guess that would have been Kilby Smith. Kilby Smith is a senior. Yeah, that's right. He's a senior regimental commander. It's Kilby Smith. And a lot of these units, that you've been hearing about this morning, on the federal side, I won't talk about the Confederates right now, but on the federal side, a lot of these units that we've been talking about early in the day, like a Stuart, like Sherman, the units in Sherman's division, the guys that really fight for a big chunk of the day. You know, not like Stuart, Hurlbut, who come up a little bit later and don't get involved very early, things like that. But these guys that have been fighting since the early morning, a lot of these units are held in reserve on the next day. So most of them are going to be to the rear. Especially on this side of the field, because who comes up on this side of the field? Buell. This is where all Buell's guys come. And that leads to the next story, because this road, Hamburg-Purdy Road, is where Buell stops his advance cold on the second day. He has not been authorized. He talked to Grant, Grant had orders. They didn't really talk, and they just wanted to retake. Once he got to that road, that was his target. He had retaken the camps on his side of the field, so they stopped. And what's right here? An abandoned camp with a bunch of tents, 4 buildings somewhat still intact, a spring, a freshwater spring, and a former hospital. So what is established here on the second day? The first frontline surgical hospital by Captain Irwin of Buell's Army. He is tired of seeing the soldiers arriving at the landing covered in mud and horse feces, in shock, or even they can't save them because there's too much blood loss. I want to deal with the soldiers and their injuries at the front. So he finds every available member of personnel and every available piece of equipment. He comes up here and he sees a bunch of abandoned tents and he snags them. And he creates, this isn't just the front line sort of hospital like they had where they're recuperating, or a first aid station where they can put a tourniquet on you, put you in a wagon and send you back to the boats. They have operating rooms. They have their own kitchen. Of course, they've got the freshwater spring. They build new sinks, i.e. latrines, we call it today. And they build this frontline surgical, and then they've got 200 beds. So they finish their work, and they start recovery. They don't have to move them. And that starts right here. Now we know MASH and everything else that led to, but this was the first time somebody attempted something on this scale. Any other questions?
Is there not a Confederate burial trench somewhere off over that way? Did they not report they buried their Confederate dead over that? Some of the Confederate dead over there.
Over there, I don't know. I know that to our right, along not the Eastern Corinth Road, but the Hamburg-Savannah Road, is the road that I drove down to get here. Over here to our right, or my right, excuse me, to the west of us, the first big road. That's where part of Nelson's division moved forward and then stopped when they reached the junction of this Hamburg-Purdy Road. And Jacob Amon is one of Nelson's brigade commanders, and he writes a day-by-day journal, sometimes multiple entries, and it's included in the ORs. And in it, he says, once they stopped, they buried 168 rebels, one grave, at their front. It would have been at this road. Probably the junction of those two roads. Is anything marked there? No. But we know. Jacob knows. He was there. Little behind the scenes information. I'll deny I ever told you this. In 1903, remember this park is created in 1894. They start working on it, buying land, 1895. In 1903, the park commissioners had to issue a report, sort of a state of the park. What has been done since 1895. And this is for Congress. Because, you know, and the War Department, remember, this is Army. They want to know where their money's going. It just makes sense. So they write this big document, 1903, this state of the park, everything that's been done, and upcoming plans, personnel, blah, blah, blah. So most of it's boring as heck, just like today. In that document, they say they have found and they have marked 9 Confederate burial trenches. 1903. 1909, the tornado comes through and destroys the office. Thousands of pages of paperwork are gone forever. Today we only know of 5 burial trenches. They're out there. They're out here. And we can figure where they are because you know where the serious fighting was. They're not going to drag a bunch of dead bodies very far. That's a lot of work. They're going to bury them there. So it's still a big graveyard, this battlefield.
When they did that study, you know, the underground ultrasound or whatever they did some time back, did they check that area over there at the...
I don't know of one that's been done lately.
I think they did one back this way.
Yes, we were just talking about it yesterday.
The last
I don't know
one.
how long ago it was, though.
Well, the last study that they did was for building the parking lot at the Indian Mound shelter. It's the last one I know of, and they did find stuff. But to do, ground penetrating radar sounds great, but the thing is, it's 5,000 acres. And nobody on the staff of Shiloh National Military Park knows how to work one of those machines very well, if at all. So you're talking about bringing in people. 2 years ago we barely kept the place open during sequester. There's a reason we don't have a reenactment this last weekend. We just don't have the budget. Now, can we? What would be ideal? Work with a school, a university. But again, you got 5,000 acres. How much time are you going to devote to that? Can you narrow it down to areas? Yeah, but you're still talking hundreds of acres. And the only ground penetrating radar I saw, we used it at Fort Moultrie once, isn't even as wide as this. This mine, and you're talking, it's like a lawnmower.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Now these were mostly Mississippi troops.
And Alabama.
Okay.
Chalmers has Mississippi. Jackson's got Alabama.
I'd start with the University of Mississippi in Alabama.
There you go. You really should be involved.
Because if they weren't finding Iowa missing, the first place they'd go is the University of Iowa and tweak them.
Don't start with University of Mississippi. They have gone politically correct.
Well, that's another issue.
You do not know that there's ever a civil war. They still have a dead house up there where a lot of the wounded from here died.
Yeah, and that is an issue, and also because it is such a flame, a fiery, flaming subject that some people may not, the university fathers and mothers don't want to get involved. They want to stay away from that controversy.
Yeah, in some cases.
That's another issue. But there's Union dead out here too that were never found.
Oh yeah.
1930s, 6 bodies were found just off the property to our southwest when a guy was putting on a porch. And luckily, the Smithsonian at that time was doing a study of the Indian mounds. So the Smithsonian archaeologist and the superintendent went on over there, and they found enough bones to identify, to tell them, yep, there's like 6 jawbones, 6 people. And there were Union buttons and some U.S. belt buckles, some federal buttons, 6 Union soldiers. And they're buried them in the cemetery, and on the stone it says 6 unknown Union soldiers.
Well, they found some Confederates too, didn't they, Chris? Not too long ago, and buried
On the
by
same
the
road.
trench,
On the same road. And they're buried out by the
big trench.
big trench. Unknown Confederate soldier,
I
yeah.
don't know what her maiden name was, but Miss Mary Harrison, who's buried in the cemetery up here.
Mhm.
Her daddy was a ranger, and they lived in that big house on the, I guess, Hamburg Purdy Road,
Okay.
because there used to be a big white house there.
Okay.
And they were working in the garden one day when they found a Union soldier, a complete Union soldier, all of his buttons, belt buckles, haversack, and everything.
Yeah.
And Daddy, being the strict guy that he was, it all had to go to headquarters. I didn't get any of it.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, that's what she said, you know.
Yeah, we are bound by our,
Yeah.
our sort of oath, if you will, or our beliefs anyway. But yeah, so, and this is one reason when you go to a battlefield, they are seen, whether it's a national battlefield, national military park, whatever the terminology is, a lot of that just has to do with funding. That's why parks have different names. They're all not just national park. National Historic Site, National Memorial, blah, blah, blah. And Fort Sumter National Monument, it has to do with funding and things like that, or how it was designated, how it was saved, preserved. I think monuments, just the president can make a monument. And that's how we got Fort Sumter. But they're all memorials. And that's how they're treated and considered. And that's why you don't find baseball. It's a park, but there's no softball field or a swimming pool, a public, swimming pool. And there's not a lot of kite flying activities, things, or playing a football, because it is still a graveyard. It's just a massive graveyard, and that's how we treat it. Well, thank you all for coming in the rain with me today.
Thank you.
Great.